Selamat siang, good afternoon, everybody. This is Dino Patijalal. I'm from Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, the largest foreign policy group in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. And today we are very happy and delighted to welcome a good friend of Indonesia, Foreign Minister, the Honorable Nanaia Mahuta from New Zealand, the land of the Lord of the Rings. We all seen the movie, and I think many of you know that that's shot in New Zealand. Yeah, a beautiful, beautiful, magical country. The Foreign Minister is here on international tour that covers Australia, Indonesia, United States, and other countries. And she's on a long trip, and we are very glad to have her visit Indonesia. And the Foreign Minister is a very special and unique person. She has been in politics for about 24 years, serving in the parliament. She is the first woman and first Maori to hold the foreign affairs portfolio. And I especially like her because if you read at her bio, you can tell she's very much a community person. You know, somebody who just grows from the ground. Yeah, and we like that because FPCI is all about grassroots. Yeah, she's a community leader. She devotes her time and energy on community issues such as social services, education, the youth, young moms, and so on, right? So I think she is the perfect representation of New Zealand to the world, right? So we are very happy to have her. Thank you, Foreign Minister, for gracing us with your visit, and I trust you had a very good talk with Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi. And before I invite you to talk about New Zealand and ASEAN in the Indo-Pacific, in line with our tradition, we're gonna read you some pantun, Indonesian poetry, to welcome you. Eating salad with sprinkles of feta, the veggies come from Bali Island. Warmest greetings, Nanaia Mahuta, Foreign Minister of New Zealand. Every Kiwi bird can't fly and nosedive. They walk around and stay all night. As Indonesia and New Zealand thrive, we'll keep the friendship close and tight. They say astronauts won't get older as they landed on the moon. Thank you for the honor, Minister. Hope to see you very soon. Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta, the microphone is yours.
E ngā maunga o tēnā mana o tēnā mana, e ngā iho pūmanawa, e karahuihu mai nei, tēnā koutou katoa. Gentlemen, distinguished guests, good afternoon, salamat siang. Kia ora koutou katoa. I'd like to first start by thanking Dino and the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia for arranging today's event. Organisations such as FPCI play an important role in fostering debate and discussion on foreign policy issues, as well as connecting to those who are affected by foreign policy, to those who are decision makers. With that in mind, it's my pleasure to speak to you today about Aotearoa, New Zealand and ASEAN and the importance of our partnership in the Indo-Pacific. Let me first contextualise by drawing on a part of a karakia, a sacred prayer from New Zealand. It goes like this: Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana, kia tere te kārohirohi, ko tō hoa haere ko te rangi Māori. In simple translation, may the calm be widespread, may the ocean glisten like greenstone, may there be an eternal glimmer of light upon your path, and may peace always be your travelling companion. New Zealand is a young nation anchored in the Pacific and part of the broader Indo-Pacific region, a diverse region with huge economic dynamism and opportunity. Almost 75% of New Zealand's trade is with the Indo-Pacific. ASEAN is New Zealand's third largest trading partner, with 6 individual ASEAN member states sitting in our top 20 trading partners. and we actively contribute to the regional integration agenda through trade agreements such as ANZFTA, RCEP and CPTPP. And trade is just one dimension of the relationship that connects Aotearoa to this region. Our people-to-people links are strong. Centuries ago, Māori tupuna, our ancestors, voyaged through the region on their way to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Māori belong to the Austronesian language group, which holds deep connections to Southeast Asia. It's no wonder that generations of students and migrants from Southeast Asian countries and beyond have come to call New Zealand home, contributing richly to the vibrancy of our society. Aotearoa New Zealand is active and engaged in the region and has a long history of cooperation. We've recognised for decades that what happens in the wider Indo-Pacific impacts materially on our neighbourhood, the Pacific, its well-being and its prosperity. Like all good relationships, we share common objectives that help to promote a more peaceful, prosperous and stable region. Our support for rules-based international order, adherence to institutions and norms, and promoting economic integration has yielded enormous benefits. Promoting multilateralism and consensus building ensures respect for our common good, and it assures our pathway forward is beneficial for the region. COVID-19 has, of course, had enormous impact, putting pressure on health systems and posing risks to the economic gains that have improved living standards for millions of people. I wish to express my condolences to all those who have lost loved ones due to the virus. The pandemic has brought into focus the challenges we face. In short, we've entered an era of formidable environmental, health and geopolitical difficulties with fewer certainties and greater risks. We've all come to see that the Indo-Pacific has become increasingly contested and the strategic environment more challenging. We've seen rising nationalism, the undermining of democratic norms and deepening inequalities. Global competition is intensifying at a time when the need for coordinated action has never been greater. In my culture, the marae is a contested space where ideas, leadership, direction are often challenged and disputed. But the marae is also a place where the will of the collective often prevails based on the rules and norms, tikanga, designed to achieve the greatest beneficial outcome, with stability and peace as its overriding objective for everyone to benefit. If the Indo-Pacific is our common marae, then ASEAN has a very important role to play. ASEAN sits at the centre of the Indo-Pacific and grappling with the challenges before us. From the time that New Zealand first became an ASEAN dialogue partner in 1975, we have understood that our prosperity and stability are inextricably linked to this region. For almost 50 years, we've worked together to advance the cause of peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and to support and strengthen ASEAN's central role in the regional architecture, including through our active and enduring engagement in the East Asia Summit. Our bilateral relationship with Indonesia is also important. As comprehensive partners and fellow democracies in the Indo-Pacific, we should look to further strengthen our cooperation as we face common challenges, such as COVID-19, inclusive and sustainable economic recovery, and climate change. And it's for all these reasons that I'm pleased to visit Jakarta on my inaugural trip as Foreign Minister. Visiting Jakarta was a conscious decision, reflecting the importance of Indonesia and ASEAN. It also represents New Zealand's desire to continue to work with you to build an enduring partnership and to ensure a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Let me share our principles for partnership. Since taking on the role of Foreign Minister, I've spoken of how New Zealand's independent foreign policy can benefit from drawing on the bicultural values that characterise who we are and how we relate to others. This means that New Zealand approaches our relationships with an understanding of whanaungatanga, our connectedness to each other and our natural environment. Manaakitanga, kindness and the reciprocity of goodwill. Mahitahi and kotahitanga, working for a collective benefit and kaitiakitanga, acting as guardians for the people and the planet. Ultimately, these are about prioritising people and relationships, the importance of showing respect to others, the importance of working together to address shared challenges, and the importance of protecting the interests of future generations, peace, prosperity, and stability. I'm conscious that many of these concepts, including respect, relationship building, and intergenerational stewardship, are central in this region as well, and have their own cultural expressions. These values are an intrinsic part of our foreign policy toolkit and the importance we attach to multilateralism, peaceful dispute resolution, environmental stewardship, open and transparent democracy, and universal human rights. Expanding on these, our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern earlier this year spoke about the value we place on principles like respect for rules, openness, inclusivity, sovereignty, and transparency. It's perhaps no surprise then that in our values-based approach to foreign policy, we'd like to see these embedded in the actions we take in the Indo-Pacific. These are principles that have served New Zealand well in the past and which we see as fundamental for ensuring a stable, free and open and prosperous region. Values are critical aids for navigating challenges, and they take on greater significance at a time of geostrategic competition and uncertainty. I note that many of these principles are embedded in the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which New Zealand has consistently welcomed. New Zealand is a strong and consistent supporter of ASEAN centrality and ASEAN's central role in the Indo-Pacific. We need trusted friends and partners who share our commitment to multilateralism and understand the importance of working together to address shared challenges. We need regional architecture which promotes a rules-based approach, protects human rights, and emphasises open markets and safeguards the sovereignty of all states, regardless of their size. In line with our principled approach, we have condemned at the highest levels the military coup in Myanmar. We continue to call for the immediate cessation of violence, the release of all those arbitrarily detained since the coup, and the return to civilian government. We strongly support ASEAN's efforts to restore democracy in Myanmar and urge the Tatmadaw to take action towards the full and prompt implementation of the 5-point consensus, including by granting the ASEAN Special Envoy full access to all parties concerned. We've provided 18 million in assistance in the last 2 years in response to the humanitarian situation exacerbated by both the coup and the challenges of COVID-19. In line with the principles of transparency, openness, and respect for international law, New Zealand joined others earlier this year in setting out our legal position on the South China Sea. We hold serious concerns over the situation in the South China Sea, including artificial island building, continued militarisation, and actions which pose risks to freedom of navigation and overflight. We call for a peaceful resolution and for international law to be upheld. The importance we attach to kaitiakitanga is emphasised when responding to climate change, which poses a grave threat to low-lying Southeast Asian countries, as well as to Pacific Island states. We need to work together, taking ambitious global action to reduce emissions and ensure a just transition to a low emissions future. At the same time, we need to ensure that economic vulnerability and indebtedness does not become a barrier to climate resilience among those most likely to suffer the devastating impacts of global warming. We used our hosting of APEC to focus on the issues that matter, including the importance of working together to improve access to vaccines, strengthen supply chains, and ensure an inclusive, sustainable, and climate-resilient economic recovery. We want to ensure our relationship with ASEAN is practical, open, and respectful to support regional rules and norms. In doing so, we're focused on activities that provide intergenerational value, with special emphasis on peace, prosperity, people, and our planet. In peace and security, for example, we are active in preventative diplomacy, working with the region to combat transnational organised crime, counter-terrorism and violent extremism, and enhance cybersecurity. In Indonesia, for instance, we work closely with the Jakarta Centre of Law Enforcement Cooperation to provide training to officials from across the region. Meanwhile, in recognition of the benefits of trade and sustainable economic development, we remain firmly committed to ensuring that the ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, ANZFTA, remains ASEAN's highest quality external trade agreement. The built-in capacity building program for the agreement has also played a key role in enhancing our economic engagement, having provided training, workshops, and seminars to over 12,000 officials in the past decade. We also continue to share best practices in areas like agriculture, paperless documentation, and animal health to support robust economies and foster enhanced trade and economic links. In line with this goal, we look forward to the entry into force of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, on the 1st of January next year. COVID-19, of course, has posed challenges to our long-standing people-to-people cooperation, but we've risen to the task, utilising online methods to deliver short-term courses to officials across the region, including in topical areas such as public health management, good governance, and renewable energy. We continue to seek out opportunities to strengthen our cooperation and to support activities that provide real value, like providing further training for ASEAN officials on transnational crime and maritime issues next year, supporting the establishment of an ASEAN Trade Academy program, and the establishment of the new ASEAN Centre for Climate Change. We're conscious of the impact of COVID in the region and continue to support the region's response to the pandemic. To date, we've contributed $1 million to the ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund, as well as almost $30 million to the domestic efforts across the region, including $920,000 to the Ejekman Institute for Molecular Biology, right here in Jakarta. Just recently, we donated over 680,000 vaccines to Indonesia via the COVAX facility, and I do expect more to follow. In line with the values I articulated earlier, we put great stock in the nature of our friendship with ASEAN and the idea that we're working to build a genuine partnership together. For New Zealand, how we cooperate is just as important as what we cooperate on. So during these challenging times, we remain committed to the values and principles that guide us. This means that when we approach our engagement with Indonesia, ASEAN and the wider region, we aim to demonstrate our manaakitanga by being respectful, open, transparent, consistent, and constructive. We'll continue to invest in building strong, inclusive relationships in the spirit of a genuine partnership as a reflection of our whanaungatanga principles. And we'll be focusing on working with you and others to uphold the rules and norms that have secured us so well, whether it's UNCLOS and the WTO, or the principles embodied in the ASEAN Charter, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, or the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. This shared approach is an expression of kotahitanga and our commitment to work together, mahitahi, cooperatively, to ensure an Indo-Pacific region that's stable, free and open and prosperous. Nō reira, kia tere te kārohirohi te ara whai ake nei tātou, kia kotahi i a tātou. Whai mairere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister, for that very comprehensive presentation on New Zealand's foreign policy. You covered so many issues. You covered ASEAN, Indo-Pacific, Myanmar, South China Sea, climate change, trade, vaccines, and so much more. So thank you for that. And I also noticed there was a lot of rich local wisdoms that you quoted, and that is also a thing in Indonesia. You know, we refer to a lot of local wisdom in our national and international perspectives. Let me ask you some follow-up questions to your presentation, Foreign Minister. You know, we always see New Zealand as a very unique power. You're a member of ANZUS, but your country initiated a nuclear-free zone in the territorial waters, which caused problem with the United States. New Zealand is a member of Five-Power Defense Arrangement. It is a member of the East Asia Summit. You have signed on to the Treaty of Amity of Cooperation and also a dialogue partner for ASEAN. How does New Zealand position itself in the rising geopolitical changes in the region? You know, how important are concepts like strategic autonomy or balance in New Zealand's foreign policy?
Can I just take a brief moment? I just recognise that Ambassador Tantawi is on the call, and he is a good friend to New Zealand and represents Indonesia well in our country. Coming back to the question, as I mentioned in my speech, New Zealand's independent foreign policy is very important to us. And by taking a values-based approach to the way in which we exercise our interests and position, certainly within the region, is the approach that we are taking. And it enables us to be very clear around our interests as we relate to either challenges or opportunities across the region.
Thank you. And I also want to recognize Ambassador Tantawi. By the way, Foreign Minister, you'll be happy to know that out of all our ambassadors who have been posted abroad, Ambassador Tantawi is the only one who has gone away for 4 years and look even younger, right? All the other ambassadors are developing white hair like me and so on. So I don't know what you do to him in New Zealand, but he seems very happy to be staying that. And I hope you have heard him sing, because he's an impeccable country singer. Big star in Indonesia, and you know, I'm a big fan of his. Yeah, so we look forward to seeing you back, Ambassador Tantawi. Now, Foreign Minister, please explain the Maori saying, metaphor, as the old net is cast aside and a new net goes fishing, and its relevance to New Zealand's current foreign policy.
Yes, I drew on that metaphor when I talked about the reset to resilience strategy for the Pacific. And my predecessor, rightly so, underpinned our foreign policy outlook towards the Pacific with a focus on a reset, which established clearly that the relationship to the Pacific was very important for New Zealand, that we wanted to ensure that there was greater regard and consistency across government in the way that we exercised our relationship to and with the Pacific. And then COVID happened, and then climate change became more profound in terms of the impacts. So it seemed to me that the focus on resilience was a really important shift towards the aspirations of the Pacific. The metaphor of the net was really taken from my own cultural context. Essentially, the old and the new net have the basic architecture of similarity. However, the way in which you use the net over time through perhaps modernisation of technique, or whether you're fishing from off land or sea, becomes the innovative approach. And what I wanted to demonstrate is that while the concept of a net being a very useful metaphor in terms of teaching people to fish rather than giving them a fish, using that as a metaphor for the change in approach around partnership, especially in the aid space, sending a signal to the Pacific that building long-term resilience is the way forward, and that is the goal that we must keep in mind as more partners want to do more in the Pacific. And can I just acknowledge Indonesia for the second exposition, the second Pacific exposition that it hosted in relation to the Pacific, because those conversations that help the Pacific to help partner the Pacific towards realising their aspirations is the right approach for this time.
Okay, thank you for that metaphor, which I find very interesting. Minister, you spoke at length about New Zealand and ASEAN partnership in the Indo-Pacific, and as you know full well, ASEAN has been very protective and insistent on the concept of its centrality, right? And there's a view that ASEAN needs to re-earn that centrality and cannot take it for granted. And especially now there's the Quad, AUKUS, and other things. Right? What do you think ASEAN should do more in order to preserve and promote its centrality?
Well, New Zealand reaffirms ASEAN's centrality in the Indo-Pacific region, and that we will continue to work to support regional architecture, but also the role of the Secretariat to be able to link and connect across the ASEAN group, to be able to, in the first instance, ensure that the focus on dialogue is an inclusive one, but also is one that builds greater understanding of common aspirations. Now, that could be economic, but it also could be at a number of other levels. If I think about RCEP, if I think about the opportunity of the CPTPP, there are ways in which the regional architecture will do a lot to improve the way in which we work together. New Zealand sees itself as a trusted and reliable partner that is transparent and open about our intentions in the Indo-Pacific. I've reinforced that we are of and in the Pacific, and we are that part of the broader region. And that doesn't take away from our bilateral relationships within the Indo-Pacific or our relationship with ASEAN. We see ourselves as contributing towards those shared aspirations.
Yeah, thank you. There's been a lot of talk in this region about AUKUS, and in fact, it made a lot of headlines in Indonesia several weeks ago. There are some who say, the British Foreign Minister, for example, has said that the excitement had been overhyped. Yeah, it's really no big deal. And some who say that this is going to lead to a new arms race, and there are others who say that this will lead to some instability or greater competition. What do you think about this, Foreign Minister? Do you think AUKUS can add value to regional stability, or will it harden strategic rivalries?
Well, I can't comment on AUKUS in isolation of recognising the centrality of ASEAN. So that's the first point. The centrality of ASEAN is very important for the Indo-Pacific to ensure greater stability and balance of the broader interests for the region. Within that context, New Zealand has, on the record, welcomed the renewed interest into the region, but again, maintain and support the centrality of ASEAN. New Zealand's not a part of those particular arrangements. We have had reassurances that those arrangements will be compliant with the IAEA and the various treaties which assure us that there should be non-proliferation of nuclear arms in the area, and to uphold treaties, especially in the Pacific, where there's a very clear position in the area. My understanding is that AUKUS partners have met with the ASEAN group, to be able to give a level of assurance about its intentions. The other thing I would say from a New Zealand interest point of view is that there are potential arrangements that sit outside of AUKUS that still enable us to perhaps align to some mutual benefits, and this could be so for the ASEAN region as well, in terms of cyber, artificial intelligence, and the like.
Thank you. Foreign Minister, perhaps this is not generally known to Indonesian audience, but New Zealand is it's a country that actually proposed the Trans-Pacific Partnership, And as we all know, that over the years, that has been quite a roller coaster ride. It has grown, expanded. The U.S. joined and then pulled out, and now China wants to join CPTPP. So my question to you is, has the CPTPP met expectations about the potential it would have on spurring economic growth of its member countries? And what is your view about China's express interest to join the CPTPP?
Well, the CPTPP sets some very high standards that have been agreed to by those economies that have acceded to the CPTPP. If I say in a very generic sense, there have been a number of applicants to join the CPTPP. New Zealand acts as a postbox, so to speak, and we have said, look, we welcome all applications. The process will be that each of those applications will need to align and be compliant with the very high standards of expectation in those agreements, and all of the members of the CPTPP will have an interest in how those applications will be considered. I don't think you can separate any one application out based on who the applicant is. What's important is that the common standards that are sought across the CPTPP is the basis or the threshold by which accession is granted.
Okay, thank you. Well, for Indonesia too, that was a big decision for Foreign Minister. When I was in government, the big debate was whether or not we should join the TPP, and you're right, the standard was very high, and it was very difficult. It was thought that if we could fulfill those very high standards of the TPP negotiations. Foreign Minister, we're now seeing rising geopolitical competition in the Pacific Islands, your neighborhood, right? And that much is clear. You see rising China developing more presence in the region, economic and political and strategic as well. So do you see that there is a possibility of change in the balance of power in that area of the Pacific where you are located? And how do you see the growing influence of China in the Pacific? And also, can you elaborate more on the concept of the Pacific Way and the Pacific resilience?
Well, if we look at regional architecture in the Pacific part of the Indo-Pacific, the Pacific Islands Forum is quite key. One of the key issues for the Pacific Island Forum consistently has been the impact of climate change on Pacific Island nations and maritime boundaries, and obviously tuna fisheries and things like that. So it's important to strengthen the Pacific Islands Forum and the way it operates to be able to advocate for the interests there. You asked about increasing competition within the Pacific, and that is so. That is the reason why I wanted to express an approach with the Pacific that is for the Pacific, and that is the Pacific Way, which is partnering development, partnering resilience, thinking about the long-term opportunities. The Pacific have had their borders closed, and for those island nations who are absolutely dependent on tourism, for example, or the mobility of its workforce have been significantly impacted by closed borders. The other issue is debt diplomacy, and my message in a very generic sense is clear for the Pacific. If we want to improve outcomes and support Pacific aspiration, then debt diplomacy is something that we cannot see more of. We need to see a very different approach. So perhaps with COP26 and commitments around, for example, climate finance, the way in which we support the Pacific to respond to their adaptation challenges and several other climate change challenges, and the way in which climate finance could operate in the Pacific could continue to build their strength and resilience, the strength and resilience of their economy and their people and their infrastructure going forward into the future. On China specifically, I think it's very well understood that it's important for the Pacific to be able to exert and express its aspiration. And I would say one thing, and it is in the area of debt diplomacy. I think we do have to change the way we support the Pacific to reach its outcomes. And that's certainly at the core of a New Zealand Pacific-oriented resilience approach to what we can do to support, and also send a signal to those like-minded partners who see themselves as supporting or partnering aspiration in the Pacific, that they can kind of walk through the same door that we're inviting them to walk through. That is why the second Pacific Exposition hosted by Indonesia was so important, and we thank them for doing it. We also thank Indonesia for signalling that they'll include the Pacific out of the G20 conversation as well.
Yeah, well, I think you make a very important point, Foreign Minister, because in Indonesia, and especially our group, FPCI, we've been calling on the US and China to work together in Southeast Asia. Yes, they can have global competition, but at least in our part of the region, they can find some areas, some projects that they can work on. My last question to you, do you think it's possible for US, China, New Zealand, and Australia to find an area of cooperation in the Pacific Islands? Yeah.
Look, I think climate change is that opportunity. Mm-hmm. Just like a global pandemic that requires a global solution, so too does climate change. And I think I raised, within the context of both my Pacific speech and the Indo-Pacific speech, is that the way we think about a global response to climate change might well support those small island nations or developing states, and the way that they can buffer the inevitable consequences of sea level rise and what that will do to their livelihoods. And I do hope that we find a way to be able to, again, invest into the long-term resilience of the Pacific.
Yeah, well, thank you. We hope so too. We hope so too, Foreign Minister, and we totally agree with you that partnership and cooperation is really the best way to solve many of the world problems, especially today where things are especially difficult and even potentially dangerous in world affairs. Last question. This is you are a friend of Indonesia, and this is your first time in Indonesia, and I know you have limited time to see the country, but what are the 5 things that you like most about Indonesia, for the benefit of our young audience who are watching here? Yes.
The people.
Yes.
Really friendly and warm. So you get a really good sense of a country when you meet the people. And I have to say, the hospitality has been fantastic. The people are warm. The various local dishes that I have had the chance to try, fabulous. Mm-hmm. The magnitude of the city. New Zealand is a city of 5 million. In Jakarta alone, there's 10 million. That's our country 2 times over. The sheer magnitude of the size of the city is amazing. And the other thing I would say is I was really impressed. I visited a social entrepreneur set of initiatives, 3 fantastic Indigenous women leading out on that from different parts of Indonesia. And I was just totally blown away by their vision, their leadership, and their energy, and also to initiate social enterprise that was going to help communities at a really local level. It was inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Foreign Minister, for your kind words about Indonesia. And I want to thank you for speaking to us, to our young audience. I also want to thank all the people who are joining here from, if you see the faces, they are from all over the place, from all over Indonesia and from all institutions. So really thank you everybody for joining our conversation with the Foreign Minister. And Foreign Minister, if you want to keep Ambassador Tantoy Yahya a little bit more, you can, feel free. Just make sure you send him back to Indonesia at some point. But I want to close again to honor you with a pantun. Rainforest, the home for the leech. On the trees and grounds, they are crawling.
Asik.
We thank you for the insightful speech.
Masuk Pak Dino.
May our relations stand firm and lasting.
Mantap.
Sorry for the background rap. That's the another one. In the south, there's an island
Cakep.
where you can find the tuatara. We wish all the best in New Zealand.
Masuk Pak Dino.
And to you, Minister Mahuta. Thank you very much. And have a safe trip and come back and see us again, Minister. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Thank you.
Nama saya udah berapa kali disebut di sini.
Udah? Pak Dubes, kapan balik?
Well done, Dino. Well done.
Thank you.
Wow. All of you